Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the second of 7 Towards Stockholm+50 Legacy Webinars, Environmental Diplomacy and Multilateralism. The event has been organized by Stakeholder Forum for a Sustainable Future in collaboration with ForUM Norway, the civil society unit at the United Nations Environment Program in Nairobi, and with the support of the government of Sweden, the host country of Stockholm+50. I'm Charles Newhan, Chairman of Stakeholder Forum for a Sustainable Future, and your host today from New York. I am joined by our moderator, Dr. Maria Ivanova, who is in Boston in the United States, and Stakeholder Forum Senior Advisor Jan-Gustav Strandenaes, who joins us from Oslo in Norway. For those of you unfamiliar with Stakeholder Forum, it is an international, not-for-profit NGO that has, for more than 25 years, been working to advance sustainable development at all levels. Stakeholder Forum seeks to provide a bridge between those who have a stake in sustainable development and the international forums where decisions are made in their name. Now, a bit of housekeeping. Before we start the program, I'd like to make the point that the webinar is being recorded, and a link to that recording and a copy of the presentations will be posted on the Towards Stockholm+50 website soon thereafter. Now a bit about audience and how they will interact. All attendee cameras and microphones are muted and will remain that way throughout the webinar. The webinar will address a range of key issues in multilateralism and diplomacy with a panel of expert guests moderated by Dr. Maria Ivanova, including a discussion on forward-looking recommendations. This will be followed by a questions and answers session, and then by reflections from one of our special guests, John Matuszak. Please note that the questions should be submitted in the Q&A window, not in the chat window. The chat window is for you, the audience, to communicate amongst yourselves, and if you wish, share information with everyone relevant to today's subjects. The chat will be saved and it will be shared with all the participants. Back to the questions. You're welcome to scroll through and upvote the questions. And that is, vote for a question if you too would like to see that one addressed. It will help us select questions that the speakers can answer in the time that we have. Apologies in advance if we're not able to answer all of your questions due to time constraints. Now let me introduce the panel. Dr. Maria Ivanova is an associate professor of global governance and director of the Center for Governance and Sustainability at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, and a scholar of the United Nations Environment Program. She is the author of the recent book, The Untold Story of the World's Leading Environmental Institution, UNEP at 50, published by the MIT Press in 2021. Maria's current work examines national performance on fulfilling commitments under global environmental conventions. She served on the delegation of Rwanda to the recent 5th session of the UN Environment Assembly, negotiating the resolution on a global treaty to end plastic pollution, on the Scientific Advisory Board to former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and on the steering group for the International Science Council on Strategy and the Intergovernmental System. Jan-Gustav Strandenaes began working with the UN on environment and governance in the 1970s. He has been lecturing about the UN for 20 years, worked for NGOs at the United Nations in New York during the Commission on Sustainable Development years, and has carried out multiple assignments for UNEP. Jan-Gustav worked as a diplomat for Norway's Foreign Office in Botswana and Uganda, and later directed a large environmental NGO in Norway for 2 decades. Earlier in his career, Jan-Gustav was an intern with Maurice Strong's team at the 1972 Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment, and I'm sure he'll make some comments about that when we hear from him. Finally, today's expert panel includes Carmen Arias, Deputy Director of United Nations and Global Issues at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Peru, Narges Saffar, Advisor to the Deputy Head of Environment in Iran, Philip Osano, from the Center, he is the Center Director of the Stockholm Environment Institute in Africa, Shereen Zorba, head of the Secretariat of the UN Science Policy Forum on the Environment at the UN, and John Matuszak, an international environment and sustainable development advisor, independent consultant, and senior fellow at the Center for Governance and Sustainability at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. Please welcome Maria, Jan-Gustav, and our panel of special guests. Jan-Gustav will begin with a brief comments on Stockholm+50 and then hand the floor over to Maria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. And as you directed me beforehand, I shall be very brief. I am the project coordinator for the Legacy project, which we are about to hear more. It consists of 7 parts, of which this present webinar is one. In fact, this is the second in a series of 7 legacy seminars, and we've named the series Legacy Seminars because the themes that we deal with relate to the major themes discussed back in 1972 at the Stockholm meeting, and these themes have been among the mainstay issues in UNEP's and our quest for a better and more livable and environmentally sound planet. We did beforehand interview a lot of people asking questions about what would be a legacy theme, and these 7 themes are what we were left with. And as Charles also said, this all leads up to the 50th anniversary of the 1972 Stockholm Conference, which established UNEP, an event which is now called Stockholm+50 and which will take place in Stockholm in June this summer. Now, the seven themes that we came up with after interviewing lots of people were, as I said, part of the discussions that began in 1972 or even predates it. The first webinar was on the resolution 73333, more in layman's terms, strengthening environmental governance and law. The second one is this one on environmental diplomacy and the needs for multilateralism. The following will be on environmental rights, human rights, and environmental justice, rewriting jurisprudence, perhaps. Then we have one which we have called Connecting the Dots, making a forceful canon out of the Rio Conventions and the MEAs. Then environment and education and looking towards the future, and civil society, non-state stakeholders and how they have all worked with environment and UNEP. And finally, science and the environment, what do we now do? We have identified 7 well-known experts, each one at the top level at their field globally. And they have actually agreed to research and write about 50 years of work for the environment within these fields. It's an impressive thing that they've all undertaken, and I'm not sure to this day if they actually understand what they agreed to. They took the job to coordinate these, putting it together. They have now involved a large group of their own networks. So this is a truly global endeavor. And finally, we will put together all these 7 themes, which will be 7 chapters in an interesting publication. I think it's fair to say there's nothing like it today. I have listed 4 books on UNEP. One is the good book that Maria's written. There's one called UNEP at 40, and there's one called From Stockholm to Rio and Beyond. There will be one published in May, but apart from that, this whole area needs more books and more background information. And this is one of these huge, important contributions, not only to the background of today, but also for posterity. With this, I leave the word to you, Maria.
Thank you, Jan-Gustav. Welcome everybody to this webinar. Indeed, thank you for including this panel on your list of key topics. It's important that we speak about institutions, that we speak about multilateralism, about diplomacy, and what to do about it. So today I am delighted to welcome a really fabulous panel so far of women from around the world. I have to say that Philip Osano, who is the director of the Stockholm Environment Institute in Nairobi, was stuck in the Schiphol airport in Amsterdam in the strike that happened yesterday. And so he is now on a plane to Nairobi. So he will not be able to join us directly. And John Matuszak is in a class, but he will call in and we will take his phone call from Washington, DC, and see how we experiment. So this new way of connecting is really fascinating. I see people in the chat are saying where they're from. We have about 80 participants, clearly from around the world, and we will experiment with having people use different forms of connectivity today. So I will welcome you in here and set the stage for our conversation. But what we're going to do today is not a series of PowerPoint presentations. We are going to have a conversation. And for that, you will see, I hope that you will see all of us on the screen at the same time, and so that we go back and forth, and we will monitor the chat, we will monitor the Q&A. I have PhD students in the audience who will react, who will put in other books and articles and connect with you. And let's use this space as a connection. And I'm just going to set the stage very briefly about what we're going to talk about today. So for this, I'm going to share my screen and walk you through this topic of reimagining environmental multilateralism. This is what we're going to do. Let's reimagine multilateralism. I have to say, multilateralism is broken. At the moment, we are in a crisis situation in so many ways. The environment we're seeing all the effects. Multilateralism is at a standstill. How do we bring states to collaborate? But how do we bring organizations beyond states to collaborate? This is why today in this space, we have officials who represent states like Narges Saffar from Iran and Carmen Arias from Peru. Both of them negotiated at the UN Environment Assembly in Nairobi, and Peru led the negotiation of the plastics resolution, a big multilateralism win. But Peru also led the commitment to the climate agreement with the Lima COP before the Paris COP. So that was in 2014. And so we'd love, Carmen, to hear from you about the commitments from non-governmental agencies. And then Shereen Zorba is joining us here from the UN, from UNEP in Nairobi, and she's the director of the Science Policy Business Forum. And Shereen will tell us of how we engage businesses in multilateralism. But so what I'd like to just do briefly is take a step back and look at the environmental institutions. As Charles introduced me, this is what I do. These institutions, yes, are 50 plus years old. I have studied them for the better part of 20 plus years, and this is indeed how long Jan-Gustav and I have known each other, and we have been in this space for a number of years. And Jan-Gustav, last time, you, on the previous webinar, you said twice that one of your recommendations was to upgrade UNEP to a specialized agency. Twice I counted, maybe you said it even more. And I am here today to say I disagree, and I will explain why. The discussion of that disagreement is indeed in my book on UNEP that I will talk about very briefly. But I think that the vision that was set out in Stockholm for a non-specialized agency still stands. We just have to make it work. So today we'll talk about UNEP as the anchor institution. We will talk about all of these other agencies or these institutions that you see here. These are the secretariats of the various conventions, and these are their acronyms. And we will discuss with our panelists what has worked, what have been the challenges, and what is the vision for change in environmental multilateralism. And then we'll focus on how do we cause the change? What are the ideas for action? So just to the setup, Carmen and Narges and Shereen and I, all of us here are just fresh off of the UN Environment Assembly in Nairobi in March. The focus was on plastics, stop plastic pollution. And I had the honor to serve on the delegation of Rwanda. I hold 2 passports, of Bulgaria and the United States. I did not serve on either of those 2 delegations. I did serve officially on the delegation of Rwanda as an academic to contribute to the discussions of what are the governance issues, what are the multilateralism challenges, and how do we move forward. And I know Carmen, Narges, Shereen will have ideas for that. But where I am an expert and why I was on the delegation is the UN Environment Program, UNEP. The book that was mentioned is the Untold story of the world's leading environmental institution, UNEP at 50, that is actually the first and still only academic book about UNEP. There have been other books, but they are not with academic in the academic sense of the word, for creating a knowledge base for an understanding of how UNEP has functioned over the past 50 years. And it is in that book that I explain respectfully, Jan-Gustav, that the vision originally of a small, smart, nimble, flexible organization that UNEP was supposed to be, and not a specialized agency of the UN, still stands. And the question is, what has not gone right? What has been achieved? What has been successful? But also, what could we do differently? And this is what we'll focus on today. The way I go about these issues is by talking to people, by producing engaged scholarship. I convene the people who were imagining the system, the people who are leading the system, the people who are pushing on the sideways of that system. So in 2009, here to the left, you see all 5 UNEP executive directors until that time. Morris Strong from right to left, Mustafa Toba, Liz Dowdswell, Klaus Topfer, and Achim Steiner. And I had the pleasure of convening them along with the past, the present, the future leaders of environmental governance in Lyon in Switzerland. And we connected thinking about what works, what doesn't, why, and how do we move forward. Indeed, as Morris Strong has always said, and this is what he practiced in Stockholm, the process is the policy. Being able to connect people, being able to see the big vision and move forward was really critical. And that happens by connecting to people. And to the right here, you see Ambassador John MacDonald, who passed a few years ago. He was in the US government, in the international organizations section, imagining a new international organization for the environment, UNEP. And then to his right, or to his left rather, is Ambassador Lumumba Diaping of South Sudan, who in 2009 was the chair of the G77 for the for the Copenhagen COP, that 2009. And then we had emerging leaders that had the chance to connect with these people, hear the vision, and move forward. We have continued this series that we call the UNEP at 50 dialogue series, starting in May 21 with the executive director, Ingar Andersen, and then the former executive director, Achim Steiner, and now the administrator of UNDP. And just last month in March, we were in Nairobi at this session on looking back. Tomorrow is our next conversation in this UNEP at 50 dialogue series with insights from member states. We're bringing the United States, Rebecca Weber-Gaudiosi, and Switzerland, Franz Perre, to discuss what is the role of member states in multilateralism. So this is where we are. at the moment in terms of thinking about these issues at the Center for Governance and Sustainability. But today we're going to focus on the bigger system, this set of different organizations, all of these conventions, the multilateral environmental agreements that make up the multilateral system, and the anchor institution, UNEP. What has worked, what hasn't for multilateralism, why, and how do we move forward? So with this, I will step back and invite our panelists to the front, and I turn on your videos, join the virtual Zoom table, and we can start our discussion. So we will go back and forth in a conversation mode, but before we do so, I'd like to turn over the floor to you briefly, just to kind of introduce yourself in your way. What is the one thing that you'd like people to know about you in this seminar, to take away from you, to take away from this as, oh, here's how I remember Carmen and Narges and Shereen. And then tell also a little bit about what has worked in multilateralism from where you sit, from your point of view. So Carmen and Narges and Shereen, the floor is yours. Carmen, please.
Thank you so much, Maria, for inviting me to be part of this panel, to this amazing panel. I'm glad to be here and to share with all of you this conversation about.
Carmen?
Yes. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Better. Now
okay, I'm sorry.
Yes.
No, sorry.
Yes.
I was saying
this is great. I just want to make sure that we are in a panel mode and that the participants can see all of us on the screen, because I don't see that. So if someone in the chat can confirm that you can see all of us on the screen at the same time, that would be fantastic. Yes. Okay. I see. Yes. Perfect. So yes, Carmen.
Yes, I was saying that it's a pleasure for me to be part of this panel, and thank you so much for having me here and to have the opportunity to exchange ideas and ways how to strengthen environmentalism, the multilateralism, and in particular in the environmental governance, and that's very important today. The thing that I would like to say about me is I am a negotiator. For many years I have been involved in multilateral negotiations. Not only related to environment, but also human rights and gender equality. So yeah, I am for vocation and because I am a diplomat, I am a negotiator, and I try to convey ideas, to promote solutions, to promote dialogue. So that's my job. That's my job. I don't know if you want me to continue about.
Yes.
Okay. So, as Maria, you have mentioned that the world is facing current challenges, and we need more diplomacy now. We need more solidarity. We need more cooperation, and multilateralism is the platform for achieving that. Multilateralism provides the tools for doing that. Regarding the environment in particular, you also have mentioned that we are facing a triple crisis. And the idea of finding solutions, we cannot find solutions in an isolated manner. So we need multilateralism for doing that. So we need to strengthen the tools that multilateralism provides us for trying to promote sustainable solutions in the environment field. And also, I think, and this is a reflections that I have, that multilateralism provides a platform for progression. And when I say that, allow me to use the example that you have mentioned this morning about plastic, because international community has been discussing initiatives to limit the plastic pollution, and we started with the marine environment. You remember that was focused on the marine environment and trying to limit the pollution on that. But then the knowledge expanded, the awareness expanded also, and people are now conscious that that we need to deal with the plastic pollution in all ecosystems. And as you said, we are now in the point of starting a negotiation on plastic, on a plastic agreement that covers the full cycle of plastic. And this idea gives a clear sense of movement, a sense of advancement in the protection of the environment and in the well-being of the humanity. So I guess this is a clear advantage of the multilateralism and in the environment. Also allows, as you have mentioned, allows for developing countries like mine, allows the possibility for leadership. You have mentioned the leadership that Peru had during the COP20. I had the honor to be part of the team of Manuel Pulgar Vidal. It was amazing, an amazing experience. And for countries like Peru, that give the possibility to exercise leadership and to promote initiatives and to convey, message and as you said, in the case of the negotiation of plastic, the plastic resolution in Nairobi, together with Rwanda, we promote that initiative, and we have been able to have a very ambitious result at the end. Another element that I would like to highlight, and I guess is important, is also part of this forum, is the participation of the relevant stakeholders. Without all the stakeholders, it wouldn't be possible to generate action, decisive action on environment and on climate action, for example. And we need the participation of a wide range of stakeholders. And also another element that is important is the interface between policy and science. And this is a two-way road, because on one hand, science informs environmental negotiations, but also as in the case of plastic pollution or in the case of climate change, we have seen that also the negotiations can motivate more research, can incentivize, can promote further innovation and technology transfer that is particularly important in developing countries. I guess these are my reflections for today, and I guess we can continue talking, but at least I guess I have these reflections down, and I leave it that.
Thank you, Carmen. This is exactly it. We're starting with a few reflections to give us a bit of broader ideas, and I see people in the chat are responding. Feel free to put thoughts in the chat as you hear any of our panelists, and if there are any questions, put them in the Q&A space, and we will monitor, and I will bring them in and address them as we move along. So with that, thank you, Carmen, for highlighting these issues that we have a platform for progression. This is very, very important. Now we'll go to another negotiator, Narges Saffar from Iran. Narges, we are very grateful. This is a Ramadan. This is Ramadan month. Today is a holiday. You are taking time away from your family as it is the evening for you now, and we're very grateful. Over to you. How do you want people to know you in this space, and your views on multilateralism successes?
And thank you so much, Maria. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar. And thank you so much for the Strength team for arranging this webinar series before the Stockholm+50. You introduced me. I'm Narges from Iran, and I was a negotiator for Iranian delegates from UNEP 1 and 2, UNEP 5.2. And I'm happy I'm here. I would like first to begin my description of multilateralism by quoting a poem by Sadi, a 7th century Iranian poet, which is the headline of multilateralism. He says that human beings are members of a whole in the creation of one essence and soul. In one member is afflicted with pain, and other members uneasy will remain. I think and believe in multilateralism is the achievement of common sense, is a common life, a common destiny, and common well-being. And it is important things there, and it is important principle that the developing countries always emphasize about that that common but different responsible. Sometimes climate conditions are the main reasons for countries to be unilateral in dealing with it, as well as to provide more favorable conditions for their citizens. But my questions are from my side. First, is the environment limited to a point or a border? Or will the environment of the upstream countries not affected if they ignore the rights of the downstream countries which need to provide water resources, for example, for its wetland ecosystem? Or does the environment tolerate unilateral at all? The answer to all three questions definitely is no. What has happened in the last 50 years in the extensive cooperation between international institutions and countries to create a common global vision for solving environmental problems certainly has been the best and most tangible actions that is highly commendable and progressive. But the extent of the development of multilateralism in the world as a whole should not overlook the weakness in the development of region diplomacy. It is the main problem in our region that my country is set. In this regard, the role of UNEP and other international institutions in monitoring the current situation and mediation between countries is very important to advance multilateral negotiations. These issues is very rare in the West Asia regions. As an environmental expert who has seen many ups and downs in environmental issues over these years, I'm interested in addressing the issue of multilateralism on cross-border environmental issues in Asia, especially in West Asia. It was my honor to working with a regional team of UNEP. It was very valuable experience for me. And due to this spatial, geographical, climatic, and strategic location, the West Asian region has been affected not only by political, security, and economic challenges, but also by climate change. And all of these conditions has made the importance of multilateralism the highest value. I think in the first part, that's enough. I would like to continue in the second part to mention specifically what is the challenge and what we need to change it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Narges. Really appreciate your emphasis on the commonality. And thank you for that beautiful poem that you started with. Would love to, if you would put it in the chat so that we could share and put the name. Would certainly look into this. What a fabulous way to start this discussion, indeed. And I'd like to point out that the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands carries its name from Ramsar in Iran. So it's important that grounding in the groundwater. Now over to Shereen, who also has worked on these issues from so many different perspectives, and being in the Secretariat and working on the science, policy, business part of the equation. So Carmen was talking about the science policy interface, and Shereen has taken it a step further, and she talks about the science policy business interface and started the Science Policy Business Forum. Shereen, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. And thank you, everyone. It's really an honor to be amongst such a distinguished panel and wonderful people. And good job. We have enough women on this panel, which is amazing. So, so my name is Shereen Zorba. I'm from Egypt. And I've been in the UN system in the international relations diplomacy arena for the last 23 years, from peacekeeping operations and negotiations to development, sustainable development and the environment, most of this time at UNEP. I am co-founder and I head the Global Secretariat of the United Nations Science Policy Business Forum on the Environment. This is newish. I mean, when we talk about 50 years of multilateral action on the environment, we are hardly 4 years old, but growing very fast. And Maria is a senior advisor and one of the founding parents of this forum. So I just want to maybe just address directly the questions that Maria posed, and they are very complex questions. I think there are easy answers. So maybe because I'm naive, maybe not, but let me just, at least I'll provide a perspective, one perspective. So what has not worked in regards to environmental diplomacy and multilateralism? And the next part is, what is the vision for change? And I believe that what has not worked, let me start with what worked. What worked was the science. And what worked was the agreements, the multilateral agreements in terms of we have them. We have these agreements. We agree, we all agree that we need certain things to happen based on the science. Do we need more? Maybe, but it depends to what effect. So the value of these agreements, in my view, is to the extent to which they are useful. Very simply put, have these agreements been implemented? I believe the biggest problem is the implementation gap. We have a huge implementation gap that needs to be resolved. So one way of doing it is by asking the question, why haven't these great environmental agreements based on the science? We have all the science we need to tell us that we're not on track to meet any of the environmental goals, whether we're talking about the MEAs or the SDGs. Is there an opportunity that these are going to be implemented? Yes, but maybe we need to re-examine the way we think about things, because sometimes perspective is everything. You can have the different ingredients, but they're not put together in the right way. So everybody's talking about political will, and indeed political will is super important, but it's also about empowerment, and it's about empowering which parts of society. It's about inclusion and exclusion. Who are we excluding from the table? And had we been meeting in person, I would have loved to start with this question. Who are we excluding from the table? Let's talk about civil society. And civil society is not a block. It is not civil society, it's a block. Let's put them in a room. They can talk to each other and then come and tell us what they think, what are the conclusions. There is still this siloed approach that we came up with more than 76 years ago when we started the entire system for the UN. And we continue with very little change. Inclusion is about equity, it's about equality, it's about justice, it's about ethics. But I think if we go back to inclusion, and all these things need to come together, but who does not have a place on the table when we negotiate? I think it will be most of these elements, really, including, I would say, industry and the private sector. Now, with industry, there's a lot of lobbying. So one look, and I'll be so bold, I'm giving myself the right to be bold after 20 plus years in the system. If you look at civil society, where does industry stand? You'll find there's a lot of lobbying. They themselves would agree. It's the lobby groups. The real industry, the real technology giants and startups, where the solutions lie, because solutions, when it comes to technology, it is not owned by government, really. It's not owned by the UN. It's not owned by anyone. It's not owned by NGOs. It's owned by the industries. Research and development happens at the research and development centers in some of the biggest, technology giants in the world, and some of the smallest. I mean, some of the greatest, startups are doing amazing works all over the world. And it's a movement that is not part of the UN and that the UN has very little access to. It's a very superficial relationship. So if I go back, I would just say, what has gone wrong? Simply put, it's implementation. There is a huge implementation gap. What is the vision for change? 1, inclusion. 2, accountability and transparency. We're very poor on that. And I'll give you examples. 3, measurement, data, reporting, which is foundational. We need to examine, as I said, the role of industry under the inclusion banner, with an understanding that technology is the master of the world we live in. The world we live in, the World Economic Forum calls it the 4th Industrial Revolution. I don't know if we need names or labels, but technology has the potential to solve many of our problems. But this technology needs to be integrated. We need integrated solutions. We need technologies and solutions, integrated solutions that are supported by policies that are bold and that are forthcoming and that we work on together. And we need financing. Some of it might be development cooperation. I call it state philanthropy, but maybe we need to go beyond that. So I'll stop here, but I feel that if we rearrange the system, rearrange the thinking, rearrange the priorities, and try to think from a solutions perspective that is combined with inclusion and equity and ethics and accountability, only then we will be able to really make the change that we need. Otherwise, we will continue to talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Shereen. Thank you, Shereen. And indeed, we actually have to gather and talk about these things. So this is what we're doing right now. But you identified a few key issues. Actually, Shereen, you went on and discussed all of the questions that we were planning to do for today. So we'll come back and you jump in with examples for what you're thinking. But you said one of the major issues is implementation and the implementation gap. And I couldn't agree more. We were going to talk what has succeeded, what has been effective, but yes, this is the gap implementation. And I would like to also posit that implementation has also been effective. It actually has been effective. We have solved the depletion of the ozone layer. It was a global agreement, the Montreal Protocol, the Vienna Convention on the depletion of the ozone layer and the Montreal Protocol. And to come back from Carmen, the science policy interface, science identified it, right? Then policy, governments, just like Narges was saying, governments have to do this. They acted, they committed to collective responses. And then indeed, Shereen, as you point out, it had to be implemented by everybody. And business was absolutely critical in that situation. So the one global problem that we actually have reversed, we have resolved, and I would dare say because of UNEP's leadership. And I explain in the book why it is because of UNEP as an institution, but also of Mustafa Toba as the individual who was leading UNEP at the time. Yes, an Egyptian indeed, Shereen. And he was a scientist, he was a self-educated lawyer, and he was able to bring all of these different elements to craft the scientific message, the political agreement, and then the policy instruments on financing, on technology, the timing. Narges talked about the common but differentiated responsibilities. If there's any agreement and the implementation of it that makes that clear, it is the Montreal Protocol, and it is in the ozone case. Developing countries were given more time. Developing countries were given financing, and there were institutional arrangements with these ozone units, with very clear institutions that were helping national entities to create the policies, to implement the policies, and to engage the industry, but also the public. So we have done these things. We have done some of these things. We've done them well. And Carmen points out in Lima how we have engaged the non-state actors toward making commitments for climate. And now the question is, what are we going to learn about for plastics, and how are we going to create a new agreement for plastics that actually takes that forward and builds on all of these lessons? A little bit later, I'll show you something that we've developed here at the Center for Governance and Sustainability. And indeed, this is what brought me in collaboration with Narges. It is the Environmental Conventions Index, where we do measure the implementation. And I'll show you some positive trends, and I'll show you all of the countries in the world. But before we do that, I want to go back to Narges and ask you now, Narges, what are the challenges? Where do you see that we still need to do work, and maybe how we move forward? And then to Carmen.
And thank you, Maria. As you may know, the important challenges in our region, especially, is the diplomacy between the neighbors, and the rule of the UNEP about these problems. As I mentioned, that due to the special geographical, climatic, and strategic location, the West Asia region has been affected not only by political issues but also by climate change. The current situation in this region is very hard, very difficult, because of this region is arid and semi-arid climate, has semi-arid climate, water shortage has problem, and even dehydration. The outbreak of a temporary and permanent war and conflict in this region has not created as an escape for any country in the region, including the safe countries. And these crises have also endangered environmental security. You know that Iran was leader for the sun and dust storms resolutions in different forums, such as UN General Assembly, and approved some resolution about that. But implementation of these resolutions is so hard in our country, in our region. Rising water tensions, as well as national development perspective of countries, have been the two main reasons for the need to anticipate environmental diplomacy in the region for many years. But what happened is that despite a lot of international, bilateral or multilateral agreement, environmental diplomacy has reached the lowest level in my region. I told you that one of the reasons was the national perspective of countries, national plans of countries, and also the situation of the climate. My country always called for and strongly support UNEP's participation in multilateral negotiation in the region. For example, among the negotiations related to the regional Caspian Sea Convention, I know that you are familiar with this convention exactly, and you know that what is the problem for this convention, in spite of signed for about 20 years ago, but unfortunately we have a problem about the final consensus on the executive structure. It's very simple, but very important for start the work and for the multilateralism perspective. And I think that despite UNEP's prominent rule at the outset, UNEP seems to have run into frustration and minimize its role because of a lot of problems. But it is very challenges to be present UNEP as a head of main problem in our region to solve the multilateralism negotiations, solving the present problems such as draft and such as transboundary reverse problems that we are facing it. I think as an expert on international issues in the field of environment, I know that international organizations, due to financial and structural constraint, is not able to have a continuous presence in all geographical, but I think it's necessary to use a strong legal to advance to solve the goals of multilateralism with many countries.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Narges, thank you. You're touching upon important issues of the agency that institutions have. And often we expect UNEP to do so much, right? We say only if UNEP could resolve this problem. And indeed, maybe by saying and explaining the entire history of the ozone depletion and how that was resolved, I might be saying, oh yes, UNEP could do that. But UNEP's role is not to resolve the problems, right? It can't. It has to motivate, as you were saying, the common vision, all of us to be able to act. And I'm seeing several questions now in the Q&A space. And Carmen, I'm going to turn to you to kind of reflect a little bit on these issues, but also on some of the questions. I see Daniele Magalhaes. Excuse me for when I mispronounce or if I don't pronounce the name, but Daniele is what I see about the biodiversity COP and the Aichi targets. So I don't know, Carmen, if you want to think a little bit about that, is how have the critical geopolitical situations could be used by states to postpone the biodiversity progress, what is happening on biodiversity, if you are familiar with that. And then I also see another question that is currently anonymous, but it's related. How are the MEAs working collaboratively with each other and with other institutions? And how do UN financial instruments prioritize support for MEAs or penalize those undermining MEAs? That's a difficult question because the financial instruments are actually part of the MEAs, and they're supposed to support countries rather than the MEAs. So we're talking about these institutions, these agreements. Carmen, you were negotiating a new agreement. So any thoughts on this big suite of issues?
Thank you so much, Maria. And yeah, these are not a good easy questions, and there are but I am a person that is convinced of the power of multilateralism, and I guess even in these difficult times, multilateralism provide the space to continue the negotiations, and I guess we are in the road to the biodiversity COP, and I guess we are at the end we are going to have at the result. I guess the work on that COP continues, and I guess at the end we are going to have a good result, a good agenda for the biodiversity targets. Having said that, I would like to say that, as you have mentioned, in the environmental governance, we had a lot of instruments. Some of them have worked well, as the Ozone Convention. Other treaties have ambitious provisions, but we need still more action, more commitments, more engagement, and this is part of the work that the governments have to do. But also we need motivation, the support of the participation of the stakeholders, of the academia, of the civil society, of business. I guess we need the engagement of all of them in order to have an urgent action as the science requires for complying with the commitments. We don't have time to lose. We are going through a very difficult times in this aspect. And related with one of the aspects that you have mentioned is the aspect of financial. And for developing countries like mine, like Peru, financial commitments, to be able to comply with the financial commitments, that the international community can comply with that, because there are some commitments that we already have. It's very important. We are for example, in climate change, we're in a process of negotiation, a new and finance goal for mobilization resources, and that's important because developing countries need the support in improving their capabilities in transfer technology. So we need to be able to comply with the international community need to comply with the financial mechanisms and commitments. And also related with Shereen has mentioned in her intervention, I would like to say that it's important to include and to be really conscious about the importance of the human-centric approach in the environmental negotiations and environmental governance. And that's already stated in Stockholm. And we just need to take in consideration that in Stockholm, we said the protection and improvement of the human environment is a major issue which affects the well-being of people and economic development through the world. So we need to be conscious of that environment is part of the sustainable development, that we need to include a human rights approach. We need to be able to adapt a comprehensive approach in the environmental agenda that includes human rights, that includes gender equality, that includes intergenerational approach. And why, when saying that, because it allows a participation, the inclusiveness, and to hear the different voices, and not leave nobody behind, right? So that's very important to have this element of human rights. And for example, that's one of the challenge that we are going to have in the negotiation of plastic instrument, because including the human right perspective, we can include human health and how this plastic agreement could improve the well-being of the humanity and in general. And also, I guess it's important, and we can take advantage of this anniversary of Stockholm +50 to reaffirm the centrality of UNEP as an environmental agency. We need to strengthen the synergies with the whole UN system, with the financial mechanism, we can use UNEP as a platform for the voices of civil society, of business, to be a relevant voice in science. So I guess we can have this opportunity. And again, the negotiation of plastic give us the opportunity, because give a lot of visibility to UNEP. And I think that can serve as a show the importance that UNEP have in creating and creating environmental instruments and supporting environmental multilateralism. So this is some of the ideas, Maria.
Thank you. No, thank you, Carmen, very, very much. And I'm seeing there are questions coming into the Q&A. The discussion also is going on in the chat. And I see Gitinji, Kamoto, and others also have asked about. So Gitinji asks, do we have international case studies where citizens have sued the state for failure to implement UN resolutions, especially on multilateral agreements? The answer is yes, we do. A lot of litigation is happening, especially in the climate space. And a lot of cases have been won on governments failing to adapt and fulfill their commitments. Indeed, that goes back to the issue that that Shereen was noting, is that implementation gap, right? Or like Narges was saying, upstream, downstream, there is that common but differentiated responsibilities. What is the implementation gap? And then what can we do about it? Yes, in climate, in countries around the world, especially now young people, and I see a lot of you ask about youth, are suing their governments for not providing the kind of environment that we can survive in. So on the implementation of multilateral environmental agreements, let me share with you just quickly the work that we're doing at the Center for Governance and Sustainability that has led to the creation of the Environmental Conventions Index. And Narges knows it well because she was part of this course that we taught as part of a UNEP effort for the Middle East and North Africa, for the MENA region. And we've done this for East Africa, and we're now going to do it for Southern Africa, and we've also done it for Southeast Asia. But what we have done with this Environmental Conventions Index is indeed take the national reports that countries submit to the conventions. All of these different conventions, they have national reports. We have focused on conventions that are working on pollution, so that is the chemicals, which is Stockholm on persistent organic pollutants, Basel for trade of hazardous waste or movement of hazardous waste, and conservation. Ramsar Convention on Wetlands that we talked about, and CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species from 1973. And so what we do is take these national reports that are a yardstick. All countries have to respond to the same questions. For example, in the Ramsar Convention, is a national wetland policy or an equivalent instrument in place? And the options that countries have to respond are yes, in preparation, it is planned, no, or they don't respond. And this is how we give them a score from 0 to 5. And we do that for all of the questions, for these different variables, for all countries for the past 20 years. So yes, talking about that science policy interface, as Carmen was mentioning, science is very much in the picture. And as a result, we have developed this index. And here are some of the results. So here's the Basel Convention on the movement of hazardous waste. The deep green is countries that actually implement their commitments. So talking about the implementation gap, when you see an implementation gap, it's in red, or the dark gray is when countries have not reported. So look at how many developing countries are actually fulfilling their commitments. They are fulfilling their commitments under these conventions. Do they need more help? Absolutely. Will they be able to do even better with more help? Absolutely. Let's figure that out. Let's figure out what needs to be done. And I remember Narges, Iran was doing pretty well on Basel. And let's look at the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, which is much more technical. It requires a lot more technical assistance and support. And their developing countries are either not reporting or they're not doing as well, which is to be expected. And this is where the financing that Narges was mentioning is really important, but also a capacity. When we were asking people in these courses, which were all government officials, focal points to the different conventions, of what were the top 3 factors that enable implementation, financing was not number 1. Financing was number 3. Training and technical capacity were at the top of the agenda, the technical issues and the training for that. And that is really important to note. And so this is for the chemical conventions, the pollution side of the equation, where we do expect developing countries to need more support. On the biodiversity side, the conservation, the Ramsar Convention on wetlands, if you look at this, the world over, the entire world is actually reporting to this convention. Why? That is a different governance story, and happy to talk about this. But countries are reporting, they're fulfilling their reporting obligation. And as you can see, several developing countries are actually in the darker green. They are meeting the commitments that they had agreed. So I just wanted to share with you briefly the results of this work so that you see the science policy society interface in action. And Shereen, indeed, here will have to bring business much more into this space. And one could think of the technology business, of whether it is Google or Microsoft or IBM, of how do you bring that knowledge into the hands of the ministers so that it's in their pocket. As the minister of Rwanda, the former minister of environment, said, I need an app for that. I want to be able to see this. So yes, Shereen, I see your hand up.
Thank you so much. I actually have some questions, and maybe a few ideas, but on the questions, when I love the index, and you are coming to Stockholm, and we are doing just that. We are creating 2 days before Stockholm, where the policymakers and the leaders from business and industry, including the big guys and the smaller guys and the very small guys. But I must admit, we are concentrating a little bit on the bigger guys because they own much of that technology that we all need, which comes at a price. And where we may need to re-examine financing. But Maria, when you talk about the index, and it's the same with the SDGs indicators and all of that. When countries present their figures, and maybe Narges and Carmen can help us with this as well, the extent to which data from business is concerned, how efficient is it? And how integrated is it? Because it's supposed to be there, but we are also aware that the criteria for measurement when it comes to business is not uniform, it's not developed enough. And I don't know if governments have access to all of that information, because according to my knowledge, they may not have access. And one of the things that we are trying to mine is the science and the knowledge and the measurements from business and business associations. And this is part of the negotiation. So it brings back the question is, how accurate is this data and how inclusive is that data? It's a question. It's a genuine.
Yeah. No, it's a very good question. It's a very good question. It's a very valid question. It's actually a question to governments. So what we are doing as the academics, we're taking the data that is available, and that is in the national reports. It's all online. Well, it's in PDF format, but then we have to do something with it, and there's space there for businesses, for like tech business, for AI to help work with that data. But we don't know how accurate it is. We don't know that, because this is what governments report. So is there room for maneuver on the veracity? Absolutely. Yeah. Do I think that governments are purposefully misrepresenting? No, I don't think so. It is a capacity issue. And why I say I don't think so is because through that index, so we have now 5 conventions for 20 years, and we have looked at every single report and every single question. There is not a single country in the world that performs equally well across all of the conventions. Not a single one. Not Switzerland, not Norway, not Singapore, not a single one. As you see in the maps, in some areas, some countries are better. In others are better. And you see it in the same region. And this is what we did with Narges and the regional course. And you saw, oh, Iran is good in this area. And but Morocco is good in another one. How can we learn from each other? This is where UNEP shines. UNEP can convene governments to discuss. But what UNEP needs to do, in addition to that, is to convene more than governments. And that's where you come in, Shereen, is because you can bring in business. And there is the business. We have to make the business case of why would business want to be in the room. And where UNEP should focus and should invest, and I have been saying this for the past 20 years, much more, is to bring in academia. UNEP has brought civil society, and Jan-Gustav is the impersonation of that. He has been at all of these events, and it's Jan-Gustav that convenes this forum. It is civil society, it's the Stakeholder Forum that convenes these discussions. But what is missing in the larger kind of analytical work of UNEP is more systematic engagement of academia, and I would say is academia across the world. I saw in the chat someone was saying, well, where are the Africans on this panel? Well, Philip Osano was supposed to be here. Shereen Zorba is an African in Nairobi from Egypt, but I hear where is sub-Saharan Africa. And Philip was supposed to be here, but he's on a plane right now because of the strikes. However, what we need UNEP and other institutions in multilateralism to be able to do is to engage with kind of anchor academic institutions in the Middle East, in Latin America, in Central America, in Africa, the various sub-regions of the world, and have these anchor academic institutions and have the science, policy, society, business interface. Yes, Narges.
And thank you so much. Thank you, Shereen, for this question. It is the main challenges for gathering the data. And it is very difficult to trust all data that we put on the report and send and share to the UNEP and other institutions. But I know that it's so difficult to connect to industries, to agricultures and other sectors about that. And I think it is just a suggestion that the need to make a network, national network for gathering the specific data and trust data to share. It's very important if we distribute the exactly report, because it helps us to in future for the better work, for the better act, for the better implementation of conventions and other agreements. And I fully agree with you because of this is very problem for us about the report about the different conventions.
Thank you, Narges. Yes, Shereen, I'll give it to you, but I will also tack on a question by Jeffrey Happiness, and he's saying regarding the engagement of business and industry, how do we change the incentive structure of Wall Street? So the whole maximizing profit for shareholders is a legal obligation that trumps other prerogatives. How do we change that? How do you work with that in your space?
If I may, I will, Maria, I'll first just go back to Narges for a second.
Mm-hmm,
so,
of course.
Narges, this is why everything is interconnected. So I'll just address two issues there. First of all, in terms of private sector, we are driving towards an initiative right now with the private sector and with the investors and with the institutions who are already doing measurements, mostly in the climate domain. And we're trying to say, number one, there has to be uniformity in the data. Number two, you cannot overly measure emissions, reductions only. It has to be in the context of resource efficiency, overall value chains, which is, easier said than done. But I can tell you already that we will be able to make some announcements sector-wide across certain sectors who've been working with us the last few years. Then on data integration is essential, because you cannot understand any data or the information or the knowledge that's out of data in isolation. So when we talk about whether the MEAs or the SDGs, data has to come from all sources, and then it needs to be integrated. There are some amazing data scientists all over the world who can help us do this. It's not us as UNEP working alone. So Maria's call for academia, yes, academia to do what is very important. And I saw in the chat someone is saying it's not enough to convene civil society. It is about the impact of that convening, and it's about the integration of because at the end, when people vote, it's only a handful of people from one sector that vote on decisions. Do we need reform? I would say possibly yes, because we want the next 50 years. I think the size of the challenge the next 50 years is much bigger. The urgency is much more, and therefore reform is essential, including in the best way possible. We created the UN. The UN has become this. It's supposed to be a facilitator of process, but it's in itself this big bureaucracy. It's an entire entity, and therefore how to pass things through this and how to make things more efficient. So we have a big data alliance that has just been launched. It is member state led, because it was member states, some of them, who said we need more. And we have the anchor in the UN data strategy, the UNEP data strategy on the environment, which is being developed. And we will invite you, we'll work with Maria and with everyone to try and really bring these ideas and these. You are in the middle of things. You can help us change things and make things better. So I think we really need you there. Then Maria's question, I don't know.
Well, it's not mine. It's from the audience. It's from the audience.
The answer is I don't know, but I can say I honestly don't. We are discovering that, so it would be totally wrong to say that we do know. But I can tell you this. I think just like, because I do come originally from a peacekeeping background, I learned something from my military friends in peacekeeping, and it's some of the worst locations in the world. There is something called building trust, building confidence, and finding a common language. When we sit with the private sector, and when we started that in December 2017, one of the things we discovered is that, goodness gracious, we had the International Resources Panel, we had the International Panel on Climate Change, Maria was there, we had the private sector, we had the UN, and we had government, and they weren't talking to each other the same language. Actually, after the first luncheon, a very nice luncheon that I naively put together, I came out of this luncheon traumatized. The food was great, nice company, but people were not talking the same language. The language of, let's put it, Wall Street, might be very different from the language of the Dubai Free Zone or whatever systems we have in other countries. So within these structures, they do speak, by the way, different language. But even when you talk about the science, policy, business, society, the narrative is different. What makes you tick is different. So we have to say, the private sector, what makes them tick? Yes, some of them want to do good. They are doing good. Some of them are really, at the forefront of innovation, but they need to make profit because otherwise they cannot finance anything else. Is profit a dirty word? I think this is the first thing we need to agree. Are we talking about capitalism? Now that would make it even more complicated. What form of capital? Do we need to reinvent all that, to reimagine, as Maria is putting it? Possibly. But building trust is key. And one of the areas that we found to be very interesting is that the private sector get very, very, very motivated when you start talking about public spending. And one question we are posing to governments, and some of them are very forthcoming, like the Nordics, for example, is, are you buying green? Are you buying sustainable products? Is your public spending going hand in hand with your policies, or your ideas of what is good? So I guess there are so many layers to that discussion, but we have to embark in, to start the work we've started, but we need to do more. So I guess the very long answer is, we are finding out, and let's do it together. Let's find out together.
Thank you, Shereen. So Carmen, Narges, feel free to jump in as you're reading the questions. If you want to come in on anything, just unmute, jump in. This is a conversation. I see Narges is unmuting.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Shereen, for a very valuable experience to share with us. Thank you so much. I see that Nicholas asked about the engaging youth and addressing the intergenerational issues. That I know that unfortunately under the approximately all conventions and agreements, the UNEP are decided to use to improvement and empowerment that the youth and also women, and how a lot of program about that. And I know that it is very important to engage the countries, governments, and also with the UN systems to improve the youth and engaging them to the decision makings for the next generation, for the next for the future of environment. And I think that Nicholas and others can refer to the text of the convention, and also sometimes some annex of these conventions to help to find what we can do for the future, and some course, some plans that engage them for the environment solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Narges. We're going to shift to solutions toward the end. Carmen, I'll give you the floor in a second. I just wanted to say that we are expecting John Matuszak to join us via phone at noon, our time, which is in about five minutes. So whenever John comes in, we will engage him. But that's just to give you a sense of where we are, and we will end promptly at 1:30 the hour. I have to go rush and teach my class, so we really do need to end. So Carmen, what are your thoughts, your thinking so far, and any solutions forward.
I also would like to refer to one of the questions that it was posed. It was about the regional offices, and I was thinking about that too, because I guess one way to engage countries is through the regional office. In the case of, for example, my country works really well with our office in Panama and the regional office of UNEP in Panama. So I guess it's a good opportunity to strengthen the regional office, because they know better the situation of the countries that take care of, and they can help them to support their national policies and programs. And so I guess, yeah, this is also an opportunity to reinforce, to strengthen the regional office of UNEP. I guess as a reflection, I will say that because of everything that we have here now and till now, I guess the message is act now, act together, act with urgency, and also act based on science and a human-centric approach that is important to include the different constituencies, the different stakeholders, different voices. There are a lot of questions about youth, and I guess they have a really a transformative power. They are a strong force in these multilateral processes. And for example, in the plastic, I guess that we need to engage them in order that they can be involved and they can put forward ideas in the negotiations. I guess it's important to keep them committed and that they can participate in the different negotiations.
So on that note, Carmen, I have a question to you. First, a response to Shereen and your thought about the capitalism and the procurement, and how do we work with these issues, which does relate to that key question about Wall Street and the values. Maybe it's time for us to think about consumerism rather than capitalism. And it's not consumption, but consumerism. We all need consumption, but that is a part of our human survival and dignity. We need consumption with dignity. But when it becomes consumerism, when it is way too much, unnecessary, then that is different. And perhaps we could use that to change the narrative of how do we think about consumerism, and not what is consumption, what is consumerism. And I'd love to almost have a challenge to youth around the world and say, what can you live without, especially on the plastics? And Carmen, this is the plastics agreement. I'd like to ask you, how did it come that Peru and Rwanda, two very small states, became the leaders of this new global agreement that is, as the UNEP Executive Director Inger Andersen put it, the most significant accomplishment since Paris, since the Paris Climate Agreement. So how did those two countries come to be the leaders of that? And maybe we should say, what can I live without on the plastics front as a challenge to youth around the world?
I think it was part of a lot of work. We work with our teams in the different missions that we have, and we conducted a series of diplomatic strategies around the world in order to convey the message, to gather support. We organize different meetings. We try to talk with everybody, with different stakeholders, not only with the governments, with civil society, with all the constituencies, and we try to create a clean environment of support with a proposal. And it was very important that the proposal came from two developing countries, because we share a lot of commonalities with many countries that faced by the same situation. And sometimes when the proposals came from developed countries, they say, okay, this is a problem that is not very familiar to us, but coming from a developing countries, we share a lot of commonalities with many countries. We face the same challenges, as you mentioned, the same challenges in capacity building, in transfer of technology, in financial support. So I guess that helped a lot. And also, as I told you, we deploy a diplomacy, environmental diplomacy, in order to gather a lot of support in New York, in Geneva. We don't have a mission in Nairobi, but we also contact with our colleagues there, and we try to gather the support of the countries in order to have the co-sponsor for the resolution. And I guess we have also the support of the science that help us a lot to defend the idea that we need to have this agreement on plastic in general, not only in the marine environment, and to include microplastics because of the potential risk to the health. So I guess all these elements contributed to that we had at the end the success that we had. But the war is still starting, because we're starting the negotiations soon. So there are a lot of work to do.
Exactly, the work is beginning, and we're getting into the next gear. And as you see here, you have a lot of supporters, a lot of people that you can count on for much more of this work. Now I'd like to turn to all of you and pick out, Carmen just said environmental diplomacy. We are in a new stage of environmental diplomacy, of environmental multilateralism. If you were to describe your vision for environmental multilateralism in, I don't know, 3 words maximum, what would that be? Take a pause, write them down, and you're welcome to share. And I would also like to put that challenge to our audience into the chat. We would love to engage with that. So please put in the chat your vision for environmental multilateralism. What would be 3 words that you would like to describe it by? What would you want to see? And we will move then forward to asking, what can Stockholm+50 deliver? What will be the actions? So that will be our next prompt. What should be the actions at Stockholm+50, which is very soon. But so think about, what is your vision for environmental multilateralism? Reimagining environmental multilateralism. Okay, I'm starting to see in the chat commitment, transparency, and will. Justice, equity, inclusion, and diversity. Okay, engaging, democratic, transparent, good. So the audience is already chiming in. And now to our panel. Feel free to jump in, whoever wants to go first.
I will say innovation, advancement, and inclusion.
Innovation, advancement, inclusion. I'll ask Meg Hassey, who is working with me on her PhD on plastics, to put that in the chat and to attribute it to Carmen so that we don't lose that. Okay, Shereen, Narges.
Shereen, please.
Narges, you go first. No, I'm just teasing. I'm happy to. Either way, do you want me to? Because I will cheat, you see. It's Ramadan, but I will cheat.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, just I would want to say that multilateralism has a bright and progressive and shine future.
Ooh, then we're going to ask Narges how. What makes you think about that? That's.
You know that it is very important, and we cannot to do for the future, not the far future, very close, that we need to more negotiation to find that via multilateral agreements, multilateralism issues, we need to talk more. And I think that in the future, the future of multilateralism is very shine and bright.
Okay, we will have to hire Narges at the United Nations, I think, to ensure that collaboration, that commonality. Okay, Shereen, and then I would encourage you to look into the chat and then react to some of the ideas that are there. So, but Shereen, first, your vision.
One, we need to reinvent the multilateral system so that it's more inclusive in a meaningful, solutions-focused way. It's not about the policies only. The policies are very important, but the policies need to be devised based on the solutions that are out there that require the right kind. So what is the solution? And what are the policies to empower the implementation of that solution? What financial mechanisms? And how to have the right people on the table, not really on the table, if this is possible at all. I know many governments will not like it, but it is really, really, really important that we have the right actors on the table the right way. And I could see that in the chat. They're saying it's not enough to just invite people to be there. They have to be there playing a role, and it has to be the right role. Then there is the issue of bureaucracy. We have to trim down on the bureaucracy. You said it time and again, Maria, that UNEP was created in order to be light and nimble and a breath of fresh air, really leading. You can't do that with a heavy bureaucracy. We have to trim down or reinvent how we, accumulated this weight the last 50 years, in order to be all that. Finally, measurement. You can't manage what you cannot measure. We have to measure across the board. And we have to ensure that the measurement is independent and there is peer review, that it is reviewed and independently so that it's accurate. Thank you, that's all. I cheated a lot, right? I cheated a lot.
No, okay. You got a lot more than 3 words. You got multiple sentences. And I see now that John Matuszak is joining. And let me, as John is joining, John, you can unmute and see if we, you hear us, we hear you. And here's my vision for multilateralism. I will go back to what Stockholm had as its motto 50 years ago, only one Earth. This, I think, should be the basic principle of reimagining environmental multilateralism, only one Earth. And this is what Rwanda and Peru did. They were able to make that real through a new re-engagement of all states, but also other actors. John, I see that you have now unmuted. Are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me, Maria?
Yes, very good, perfect. I know this was a bit of a challenge. I know you are in the middle of a class and that you're taking time, you're stepping out just to connect with us, and I really appreciate that. So I'm delighted to welcome John Matuszak, who was in the US State Department working with UNEP for many years. John Matuszak was the face of the US within the various governing council meetings and the UN Environment Assembly. And so, John, we are delighted to have you here and share with us quickly reflections, because we do have to give Charles 5 minutes at the end, and we have to end on the hour. So what is your assessment of current environmental multilateralism, your future, and what is to be done?
Well, thank you, Maria, and thank you to Charles and to Jan-Gustav and to the other panelists. I'm sorry that I could not be with you during the entirety of the meeting, but I only heard late last week or got the invitation and was unable to reschedule something that I had already committed to. So getting immediately to the questions about multilateralism and what has worked and what has not worked and what are some of the opportunities. For one, I'd like to start out as somebody who worked in a Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Multilateralism is hard. Bilateralism is oftentimes preferred. Countries have embassies in different capitals, and it's easier, as all of you have experienced, easier to get agreement with one other person than it is with an entire room. That being said, it is absolutely necessary, as David Attenborough recently said in his acceptance of Champions of the Earth position. You know, the environment is something that affects all of us, and we need to work together to save it. And that includes governments, but it also includes stakeholders like Stakeholder Forum, and I'm glad to see that you're still around fighting the good fight, and I think that's critical. So welcome to all of you. I've admired your work for decades, and but multilateralism is not easy. Part of the reason is that basically, or at least in the environment and in much of sustainable development, we do almost everything by consensus. So one country can be blocking consensus or put in very difficult demands or requirements in terms of being able to achieve it. For the 4 years or 3 years where I was the chairman of the Committee of the Whole on the bureaus of UNEP and the UNEP Governing Council, we tried to upgrade and improve the policy for stakeholder engagement and make it more open. But one country, not my own, but there was a country out there, a very large and powerful country in Asia, that basically insisted that to do that, they would have to put in place a clause basically that allowed any country to individually veto or blackball any applicant that applied to participate. And both the European Union and the United States and others thought that that was too much of a sacrifice, and we were better off maintaining the existing Stakeholder Forum policy. But that's just one example of the kinds of things that can take place. Where an individual country can do that in a multilateral setting, so that we often end up with the least common denominator. Not always, and we have had successes, but it is a challenge. Not all conventions and multilateral environmental agreements do require consensus, and there are voting rules in the UN, but they are rarely invoked, and a consensus effort is often sought. Even when a consensus is achieved, the buy-in and the willingness to make individual commitments is a very difficult effort in terms of actually achieving the goals that have been set out in any kind of an agreement and a negotiation. And so we have very little accountability in terms of efforts. And this is not unique to the United Nations. If you look at the European Union and that, if you look at areas within the United States, the states getting together, even within a subnational effort, getting actual implementation is a real challenge. But I would say that is where, in fact, multilateralism really needs to focus. We've actually been pretty good, considering the shortcomings and the difficulties with multilateralism and agreement, to get consensus and agreement in the various MEAs and at the at UNEP and UNEA, but it has been, and in CSD sometimes, and now the high level forum, but it has often been followed with relatively weak implementation. We have definitely, and one of the great successes of this whole effort is to raise the profile of sustainable development and of the environment, and the need for us to preserve or to protect nature so that it can be available for future generations. But actually getting countries to then make the choices and do things, they run up against very real political challenges, and it's very hard to get an agreement where one size fits all for all the different countries, ranging in size of, under 1 million in some country and relatively small geographic areas to continental size countries like Brazil, India, China, the United States, Canada, and other places like that. So achieving that consensus is one thing, but then getting the details in terms of what the kinds of commitments and what kind of implementation are. I did manage to listen to the last set of questions there, and one of my colleagues, I think from the panel, said, the need for greater measurement. So I think that's a real opportunity, and a real commitment should be made at Stockholm, and I think a greater commitment to measurement of the environment. But I don't think measurement simply is, did you report? Measurement actually should be reporting on the basic underlying kinds of issues. Too often, countries actually check the box and they have reported, but actually, are we actually getting at the issues of, are we reducing carbon? Are we managing those chemicals, and do we have chemical spills and pollution, and are people's health continuing to be affected by these by chemicals in those agreements? Are in fact we stemming the loss of biodiversity? We measure process outcomes and not the actual output that is the critical one. Is, are we changing the conditions on the ground in terms of, is the environment actually getting better, or is it at least not getting worse at the same rate that it has been? Unfortunately, although I was involved in this for 25 years of my life, and there is still an awful lot to do. And so I think there are opportunities. I think that there are too many meetings. I know that I spent sometimes 50% of my time going from one meeting to another internationally. And I would come back and I would convene an interagency process to meet with my colleagues from the other agencies within the government to prepare for future meetings and negotiations. But a minister from a small environment ministry, and that could spend nearly all of his time out there actually doing it. And whether or not they can get instructions to their representatives in Geneva or New York and whether those individuals who represent their governments will take those instructions from capital, especially if they're from not a powerful ministry, but a ministry like the Ministry of Environment, which is in too many cases not the one of the more powerful within a government. So they have to trade off whether or not, in the overall scheme of things, if they can get a vote from their colleague to be represented on another board or on another program on a bureau, will they trade that off in terms of sacrificing maybe some of the guidance that they got from their home country in terms of the coalition that they may be a part of in terms of things. So those are challenges. I do think we should try to, and this is certainly not the position of the United States government. They have real challenges with consolidation of efforts, but I do think that a consolidation of the very many fora that we do have is in order, and also reducing the sometimes the number of meetings, trying to hold things more focused and technical when possible, to do more measurement, to put more of an emphasis on implementation than on making new agreements. And I think we need to step back and stop trying to rearrange the deck chairs and thinking that simply a rearrangement in the organization will in fact change things. We have faced some calls for trying to renegotiate UNEP and make it an organization. I think that would be a major waste of time, and I think it would end up being a step back in terms of it, because when you ask the proponents why, they say, well, to increase the mandate, to increase the voice, the strength of the voice, and to increase the resources. And I think it would actually, that kind of a negotiation, besides taking lots and lots of time and many years, what should be focused on implementation of other efforts, and including the agreements of UNEA, that in fact it would reduce the mandate. We have actually a very large mandate. I think Maria quotes me in her book of saying that you have a mandate you could drive a truck through. It's a very open mandate. I know that when I was as a civil servant, sometimes got guidance from some of the politicals that saying, well, why is UNEP doing this? I'd say, well, because it's in their mandate. They are supposed to keep open and report on and try to address emerging environmental issues. That gives them a great deal of leeway in terms of what they can do. So I think that, frankly, as we saw with trying to change the stakeholder policy in UNEP, that if we tried to renegotiate it now, it would take a long time, and I don't think it would be as strong or as powerful as the current mandate. Secondly, a lot of you would have to do it by treaty. You would have to join the UNEP by treaty, and so many countries have a challenge with that. My own country certainly does. Even during the George W. Bush administration, the president himself put forward a proposal to join the Stockholm Convention. Congress, they could not muster 67 votes in the Senate because there are many in the Senate who are not committed to the environment and to multilateralism. So certainly my own country, but there may be other countries that would have a challenge to that. And with that, there would probably be significantly diminished resources, financial resources. So trying to rearrange the decks in terms of the governance structures, I think, is a mistake. I think we need to focus on the environment and on sustainable development and try and find ways that are not always easy. We saw that, one of the reasons that President Macron did not get as much of a vote that he did was because of the Yellow Vest protests. And the Yellow Vests were when he tried to add additional gas taxes. We see, the uproar about the increased price of petrol and gasoline. Developing nations without infrastructure, without a good public transportation system, have long said that is a very difficult thing to remove subsidies or to take things off, and yet they continue to take steps in the right direction. But the trade-offs between the effects on the poorest within our communities and doing the right thing for the environment are not always easy, and to try and find single ways that that all countries can agree to can take a long time and can have unintended consequences. I think that we should really be redoubling our efforts on what we've already agreed and going forward in new areas like plastics or possibly air pollution in cities, which also affects health at this time, but we should be focusing on implementation.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much. You've said so much in very little time, and you really brought the key issues where we started this discussion, the issue of implementation, of effectiveness, of the commonality, and how difficult multilateralism is, but indeed how imperative it is. So I would like to ask our panelists to come up with one word that summons the lessons or your feelings from today. It's like, what are you going to be taking from this day today? What did this conversation, this coming together? I was counting, we are from seven different cities, from 5 different countries are joining in, but where we come from is even further than that, and that's just the panelists. And around the world we have people. So I'd like the panelists to come up with one word that this getting together kind of leaves in your psyche today. And I would like to ask our participants to put in the one word in the chat. What is the one word that describes your feelings right now? Has this inspired you? What has this done for you? So one word, Shereen, now I'll start with you. Now you can't cheat.
Two words.
2.
Hope, because of these wonderful, amazing people who have been working tirelessly and achieving things. And the other one is determination.
Hope and determination. Okay, Carmen.
I also have the same word, hope.
Hope, great. John, what is one word that describes your mood right now?
Urgency.
Urgency. Okay, hope, urgency, determination. Narges.
Exactly, urgency, and also necessary to continue.
Very good, urgency. And for me, it's commitment. And I would like to thank all of you for your commitment. Jan-Gustav, thank you for your commitment, for making this happen, for knowing you for 20 plus years. John, thank you for your commitment, and indeed the commitment of the United States as a country to create UNEP and to convene Stockholm 50 years ago. And as I write in my book, if it were not for the United States leadership, we would not have had the kind of vision, the kind of drive, and the kind of institutions that were created. What happened later is a different story, but there was a US of the 1970s that was committed. And I am seeing that commitment in young people right now. I'm seeing it in the audience here today. And yes, please put in your word. Leave it with us. We'll do a word cloud after this, and we will engage. So with this, I thank all of you, and I turn over to Jan-Gustav, to Charles, to say goodbye to us.
So can I just leave you also with one word after this?
Of course, yes, please.
Optimism.
Optimism. Okay, as Christiana Figueres would say, stubborn optimism.
I agree.
Charles.
Over to you, Charles.
What is your word, Charles?
Cooperation.
Okay.
Thank you, Maria. Maria, if you'd be so kind, if it's not too much trouble, can you share that final slide from your PowerPoint presentation? I'm just concerned that if I share my screen, it might cause my Zoom platform to crash as it did earlier.
Okay.
While you're doing that, I'll just say the last couple of comments. I would like to thank all of you, that is, of course, all of our audience, for joining us today. And thanks to the civil society unit at the United Nations Environment Program and to the government of Sweden for their cooperation and support. And a big thanks to Maria, Jan-Gustav, Carmen, Shereen, Narges, and John for today's rich and unique content. As mentioned earlier, the webinar has been recorded, and that recording, the PowerPoint presentation, and the chat content will be sent to all of you by way of an automated email from the Zoom platform tomorrow. That will include a link to the Towards Stockholm+50 events webpage, where you can then download and see. And please join us for the remaining Towards Stockholm+50 webinars, as seen on your screen. The next one is coming on Thursday, the 28th of April. It's this Thursday. And finally, a short survey will pop up when the webinar ends. Please take a few minutes to complete it. Thank you so very much. Goodbye and stay safe.